Yep. Hi guys, how you doing? Welcome to Lucius Labs podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Vinnie Adams, the founder of Disclosure Team. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an absolute honor to be here. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I like the work you've been doing lately. I believe you just came back from Colombia, or pretty recently, right? 6 months ago.
Yeah. Just at the towards the middle end of April of this year, 2023. Yeah.
Yep. So, what were you doing out there? What's going on in Colombia?
So we just got back. This was the second year that I've been out there with a team, and basically the story revolves around a 400-year-old myth, let's say, or a legend of an anomalous light phenomena that has been appearing on this mountain face. It's been reported back to the 1600s, documented in the archives in the local town near Bogota of shaman and all these people witnessing a strange light appearing on this mountain, sometimes shooting off up into the sky and things like that, changing color. And it's not really been investigated before. So I was lucky enough to be contacted by a good friend now who lives out there, who wanted to put a team together to go out there and speak to the witnesses, the indigenous people, and just try and get some answers if possible. Just get out there, get boots on the ground and look into this phenomenon and hopefully witness it for ourselves, which I'm really pleased to be able to say that in the first season, when we went out in February of 2022, after 2 weeks with the full team exploring the area, doing the witness interviews, on the penultimate night when a lot of the team had flown home, I was lucky enough to be 2 miles dead center in front of this mountain and spend an hour and a half witnessing this strange light phenomena and filming it in high definition. So the case is really kind of each year we plan on going back and taking more equipment and just trying to get to the bottom of it, more as citizens, not as big scientists trying to kind of get the answers, but just trying to kind of gain some interest in it. We have been contacted by academics and scientists who have seen the work we've been doing, and I think that's just, it just feels good to be able to out there doing something to try and understand what's been seen for hundreds of years by so many people.
That's awesome. So you had a team out there with you, right? You had I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think I've met a few of them. You had Priscilla
Yes.
from Quantum Witch Cafe, one of
Yep.
the disclosure ladies now. I believe you
Absolutely.
also had Elena with you,
Yep.
and the only one I haven't met yet. There might be more players, but Dan.
Yes, Dan Zetterstrom, that's right. So
Yep.
that's the thing. We had this core team from season one with myself, Dan Zetterstrom, and a couple of other people. But then with season two, we kind of brought in some new faces, some fresh faces, and this was kind of the premise behind the whole phenomenology name, is that we may be out there trying to crack this case, but at the same time, the whole investigation and documentary series was kind of following each of our individual journeys as we went to a foreign country, got to witness and interview people from a completely different culture and background to ourselves. And it kind of follows our journey from episode one of each season to the final episode, just to see how we develop, how we interact, how we find ourselves in a strange land, actually trying to do work on the phenomena. And I think that's always important for me to state, is that we're not just there trying to crack a case. We're all on this learning curve, just to see what we can find out about ourselves as much as the phenomena itself.
Well, so what were your conclusions, I guess, at the end of the day?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I was very conscious, especially the first time I went out there. I was very conscious that I have my biases. I'm only human. I want everything that I see to be something extravagant and unknown and anomalous. I'd never seen anything beforehand, so I'm just always so eager to say, when is it going to be my time? So to see this actual light phenomena occur, and it's a very rare occurrence as well. There's no pattern to it, so I felt really blessed to be able to see it. And it's shown in the final episode of the first season, my reaction to it, and I was really kind of surprised. I surprised myself because I found my kind of analytic brain kicking in, going, I'm not ready to just simply believe that this is something completely unknown. I was like, my brain was trying to comprehend, is it some kind of earth lights? Is it some kind of light that's formed by the magnetic structure of the ground and the earth around this kind of valley and things like that. And I kind of still lean towards some kind of prosaic explanation. But even if it is something earth-based, I think it's still something rare that hasn't been studied enough by science and academia that I think would warrant more investigation and study, because the power and energy generated in these lights from previous studies in the 80s could be something worth harnessing for good, you know.
Interesting. It's interesting you mentioned the magnetic anomaly aspect of it, because I know before you guys went out there, I was speaking with Elena, and we were looking at the magnetic layout of that land, essentially.
Okay.
And it almost seemed like there's two mountaintops.
Yeah.
One of them might have like a negative type of magnetic field, and the other one somewhat has a positive magnetic field.
Yeah.
Is that why you're leaning towards something of that nature, or?
It is kind of, absolutely. And the funny thing is, there is an underground river that links the two as well. So it almost forms this kind of natural battery as well. And then you look at the makeup of the mountains, there's high iron content and things like that. And the metallurgy, let's say, that's found within these peaks. So it really does point towards that. And this was the thing, like, that was my rational brain. But after 2 weeks of speaking to indigenous tribal people who just say, oh, no, this is definitely our ancestors. This is a portal. These are dimensions. Your brain is just a complete swirl of prosaic and anomalous. And you just really don't quite know where to kind of sit your brain, as it were. And it took me months and months afterwards to even kind of settle all that
But
busyness.
that could all be still accurate. I mean, because science studies our physical dimension, right?
Yeah.
And then basically, when it comes to portals to the ancestors, those tend to be at magnetic hotspots. So for me, I find that there's a link there, and that I like to think about how the human mind itself works within different magnetic fields. I just find that interesting to begin with. So you recently spoke about this last weekend.
I did, yeah. I was very lucky enough to be invited by Ryan Sprague to do a short presentation alongside my colleague and friend Dan Zetterstrom, who was part of the team, at Ryan's free online conference, Anomicon. That was a real honor to be a part of, and from what I've heard, it went down really well. And this is a speech that, it was a shorter version of a bigger presentation that Dan and myself were lucky enough to give in Roswell, New Mexico, at the end of June this year as well. And I think, it's always good to talk about our work, but it's also one thing that I like people to understand is that anybody can get out there and get boots on the ground and look into something. You don't have to be from a certain background. You don't have to be of a certain position within a certain community or whatever. It's just, if you have a passion for doing this kind of thing and you have this dream to kind of go out and look into the phenomena, then you can do it. And that's something I always want to instill in people.
I think that's what it's really going to take for, in quotes, a proper disclosure, because it seems like many people just rely on government to disclose information. Well, are they ever really going to give up everything that they know and have studied when it comes to national security threats because they've gained an advantage because of a study? So that's where I think having these independent crews like your team, Disclosure Team, going out there and doing this research is extremely valuable. And we need more boots on the ground, like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, I openly admit I very much do focus on the government side of things. So given this opportunity to actually take myself away from that and do something completely different was amazing. And I've always had this struggle with, how do I kind of step back hundreds of years before data was collected in the way that we know now with modern technology? How do I kind of research that? How do I connect to that? And going out to Colombia has allowed me to do that by literally hearing from, indigenous people who have had these stories passed down generation after generation, and from hundreds of years ago right to now, and to have the association between UFO, UAP to spirituality, ancestral stories of, like I said earlier, portals and spirits and all that. It's kind of allowed me to connect the two, which I think was really important for me to progress as a researcher as well.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned that had slipped my mind was the river that goes underground between the two mountains there. It seems to be related to a magnetic type of anomaly, but the
Yeah.
same as the Great Pyramids of Egypt, right? Isn't there like an underground river that goes there as well?
Apparently so, and one of the things that I had a discussion, I had a group meeting with the team last night, and we're actually planning on next year's expedition to Colombia. That this year and potentially next year as well, the river's pretty dry, which it's an El Nino year, which means there's not been much activity reported this year, and we didn't see anything, unfortunately, in season 2 with the light phenomena. So we're trying to kind of add these data points in as well, that if it is a natural phenomena, then maybe we're just seeing that lack of connection between the negative and the positive charges of these two mountains in the valley, and it's all adding to the kind of the research and investigation. So it's just it's addictive is what it is.
Yeah, I can't say I'm not jealous. I mean, you got to spend like a week out there, and you look like you were staying in a really nice little house that was like right there on the mountain as well.
Yeah,
Um, so
that's it. Yeah,
yeah,
we kind of at the end of the valley between the two peaks. We had this base headquarters, as it were, which, at night time when it was downtime, we'd finished the day's filming, but we were still out looking directly at the mountain in case anything popped off. And we had our cameras, our thermal drones, everything kind of ready just in case something happened. And then you mix that all in with meeting this amazing group that have come together to research it, and we're all from different backgrounds completely, but just that bond that you feel. And this is part of the phenomenology of the journey that we all took to form this team and learn together and grow together. It was just, I mean, it was life changing. It was absolutely amazing. 3 years ago, if you'd have said that I'd have been going to Colombia every year doing this kind of stuff, I'd have been like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Like, it's just amazing.
the camaraderie aspect of it, I think, is great because I've been studying this for a long time, but pretty much by myself, right? And I
Yeah.
keep everything hidden, keep it all secret, but that also ultimately kind of ends up secluding you from, society in a way. But the fact that the taboo and all that kind of stuff has been going away, it allows you to be more open with it, and now you can actually have these friendships develop.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd been researching this subject for over a decade before I kind of, let's say, joined the community as a public facing figure, whether it be on social media and everything. I wasn't even aware that a community like this existed. I was just happy spending hours and nights and days just in front of my computer looking up, whether it be declassified documents or watching video, just literally just delving as deep as you can down as many rabbit holes as possible until 3-4 years ago I was just like, okay, I'm ready to do a little bit more. Let's see what's out there. And you know did my thing with Disclosure Team, started that, and it just propelled me into the community to be able to do kind of the work that I'm doing now. And I've never looked back. It's everything. It's everything in my life. It's a more than a full-time job. It's a full-time passion. And, I've met some incredible people along the way who I can definitely call lifelong friends. And I think, to me, whether we get disclosure or not, I can always take that step back and say, look, I've made lifelong friends out of this. So I'm happy.
Okay, so you're in the band camp there, or on the side that we haven't had disclosure yet, because some people might say we've had some disclosure, but you just said if we get it. So
Yeah,
we haven't really gotten it yet.
that's a really, really interesting way of putting it, because I kind of, through that decade of research, I was always kind of along the lines of kind of Richard Dolan with the small d disclosure and the big D disclosure and things like that. But it seems to have got a lot more complicated these days, where people are talking about, well, it's not disclosure, but we've had confirmation, and then they're adding all these new words in. And to me, I am fairly confident when I say I think that it's pretty clear there is something anomalous happening that we don't understand.
Yeah.
And yes, I want it to be something based around a non-human intelligence, but again, that's my biases slipping in. And I openly admit that to people. But I don't think we've had disclosure.
Well, I
I
think
really don't.
one thing I watched. So you also do a podcast on your channel, the Disclosure Team, or
It's
Real
just
Disclosure,
Disclosure Team.
on YouTube.
Yes.
And you were with the UFO Rabbit Hole. And
Kelly Chase. Yeah.
one thing you spoke about with the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast was how experiencers and experiencer stories have somewhat been pushed aside at this point in time. So you're thinking that those are more important, or not more important, but that they should be spoken about a little more often.
Yeah, I've been very conscious throughout the last few years that I myself, as well as many others, have been pushing for data, whether it comes from sensor data and all these things that we really want the government to sort of make transparent. The sensor systems, whether it be radar or FLIR videos, we all want to see that really great data. But at the same time, we've had good data for many years because we've had witnesses, and a lot of people will always kind of push back on just simply anecdotal witness data and say that some of these people could have mental health issues and blah 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 and that. But if you look at the overwhelming amount of witnesses, whether it be abductees or simply witnesses to a sighting, I think, and this is just my personal view, that there is something to that. Some of the cases that I've researched, people have witnessed these things 20 feet away from them. And when that happens time after time, you can't just say that everyone that's seen these kind of things is just crazy or they've got mental health issues. Like, there's got to be something to it. And it could be an object in front of them. It could be manipulation of their brain by something. But whatever it is, it's pointing towards something, in my opinion, that is worth talking about. It's worth discussing. And it's certainly not worth just pushing to the side because there isn't radar data or there isn't video to back it up. And I think in the last few years, because the government aspect of this subject has been really pushed to the forefront, that the experiencer has taken this back seat. And I just feel with the just out of respect, we need to bring them back into the conversation to further add that data point back into the conversation.
Well, I mean, even when in court cases, they get the
Yeah.
eyewitness testimonies, right? So I mean, I feel like that's kind of what this might be one of the next steps, is getting some eyewitness testimonies on there.
Yeah.
Even though we already have people like Fravor and Graves,
Sure.
But I wanted to ask you a question here. I guess before we change topics completely. So anything planned for the future? You said you're going to be going back out to Colombia. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, we're literally in the early stages of planning season 3, which will be the documentary series. But it all is all based around really the investigation. That's first and foremost. The documentary series is kind of secondary to the work that we're doing. That's just for anybody that wishes to see what we're doing, they can. If not, there is a website where people can go and see the data that we've collected and do with it what they will. But yeah, we're always going to focus on this one case that happens on this mountain, this light phenomena. We want to continue with that, but at the same time, we want to expand our reach and travel around Colombia, looking at other cases and other myths. So, for season 3, we are actually planning on picking 2 major UFO cases. One which happened in the 1960s, a family witnessed an object flying 75 feet above their farm, and we want to go out there and try and recreate this object moving across the farm. We want to speak to some of the relatives of the witnesses and just get an idea of what that was all about. And then the other case again is a light phenomena that's been witnessed on some peaks that's been recorded back hundreds of years as well. So it's all connected in some way. But with the more modern UFO case, we're kind of mixing more modern stuff into the old as well and just switching it up a little bit.
Something that just came to mind is I have a guest coming on later on this week. His name's Jim Segala, and he has designed sensor equipment. And he was one of the original scientists who worked on the Skinwalker Ranch phenomenon with the TV show. And I was just wondering, so when it comes to collecting data and like magnetic fields and sensors, maybe I'll try to get you one of those. I think
that would be amazing. That was one of the
Yeah.
discussion points we've had recently, is that, we would like, because we're going to be based at this headquarters like we have been each year. But when we go off traveling, how do we kind of keep our eye on the mountain if we're not stood in front of it? So, we've talked about Sky 360 and all of these great initiatives that have been around for the last few years. But, we're talking quite a few $1,000s in that. And this is all self-funded and things like that. So, we are always looking for advice and help from external sources. And, I'm familiar with Jim and his work at Skinwalker, and I know we have mutual friends. So, that would be great to kind of make those connections and have that discussion. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries. And you mentioned self-funded. So do you guys have a place where people could make donations to help you out?
We don't actually know. This is the thing. The series, we have this core team. We have myself and Dan and a couple of others, but each year we open it up with about 4 or 5 other spots for any members of the public to apply to join us. They are charged, obviously, for their flights and accommodation and things like that. It's very reasonably priced for the experience. But it's to bring in people with different viewpoints. They don't have to be high-end scientists or anything, because again, we want to bring in people into a completely new country and a new realm, let's say, and follow their journey as well, and just get their insights, because having external minds and people with different viewpoints from different backgrounds, from different countries, we find that really interesting. Last season 2, we had a musician from Australia, we had an archaeologist from Germany, we had couple of girls from the US, and it was just this eclectic mix, and it brings us together to just add different viewpoints. But then in that downtime that I mentioned in the evenings, some of the best conversations were had off camera, and it all allowed us to kind of see these different people from different countries and go, wow, our lives are so different, but I can relate to you on this or this, and just it's really hard to put into words how inspiring it was.
That's awesome. So now just to move it, shift the topic just a little bit. There's been a lot of disclosure happening here in the US, clearly. What is going on in the UK? Is there any type of government movement happening there or citizen movement?
Not really, no. It all seemed to die down around the late 2010s. No, sorry, the late sort of 2009, something like that. We had a trove of UAP and UFO documents released over a 3-year period, and then after that, nothing. They shut down any investigation that they were doing, or they told us they did publicly. They were fairly open for the last, for 20 years prior to that, through the 90s and the early 2000s. But after that, it just went dead. And now whenever anybody contacts the Ministry of Defense here, or even their local representatives, you just get the same boilerplate responses that, the UK Ministry of Defense takes any kind of incursions into sensitive airspace very seriously. And this is the funny thing, whenever anybody I know or myself has mentioned UFOs or UAP, they automatically give the response that we don't take the kind of extraterrestrial thing seriously. They basically say that, but they jump from UFO, UAP to automatically think extraterrestrial. And when all we're saying is unidentified objects going into sensitive airspace, and we, it's becoming a bit of a joke these days. I've been lucky enough to speak to some personnel that work within the Ministry of Defense and the intelligence agencies over here. And they have said that it's likely that this is still being looked into, but it'd be very much hidden, very much behind closed doors. And we know that the Five Eyes meetings are happening. So the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, they're talking about it, but they won't even admit to the meetings, even though we know they're happening, because Dr. Kirkpatrick of Arrow in the US there, he's mentioned it. So we're really hitting brick wall after brick wall at the moment. But I mean, the positive side of me thinks that, the UK generally follows the US a bit behind and eventually talks about things. So maybe in the next few years, we might start seeing some conversations starting to happen. But other than that, all we get is mainstream media, tabloid kind of stigma still happening.
Right.
And the general populace is kind of still laughing at it a little bit.
So it's clearly not being taken as seriously in the public over there at this time.
Not at all, no.
And that's kind of what not really necessarily a concern is, but Congress basically passed a law that all the local companies in the US need to give up their UAP information, right? Well, Canada still has a lot of information. The UK, I'm sure Brazil has a lot of, every other country on the planet still has a lot of stuff going on. So I'm not sure if too much is going to come from that, honestly.
I mean, the funny thing is that we're all just kind of, well, not all of us, but a lot of people, and myself included, are almost sitting and waiting for the US to kind of give some kind of acknowledgement. We keep seeing the language shifting when it comes to the legislation as set out in the National Defense Authorization Act each year. And so all eyes are just on the US, like, are we getting closer? Are we getting closer? But then we forget sometimes that Russia, China, a lot of the South American countries, a lot of the European countries, such as France, have been doing a lot of work on this subject as well. All it would take is for one of them to just drop a big bombshell of information out, and all eyes are going to switch across the pond to wherever that's happening. And, then, it makes me think that the US will then have a bit of a panic attack and think, oh my goodness, we've got to kind of follow suit. So, it could come from anywhere. It really could.
I like that. That's a good way of thinking about that. Um, it seems like spirituality seems to come up a lot in this topic. That's almost where I've ended up going with it too, just because we're talking about ancestor memories, maybe angels, demons. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like when I was saying earlier about my connection, trying to connect my research with kind of the older stuff, the ancient stuff. It took me going to Columbia to kind of make that connection. On the same kind of thing, I have always struggled with the spirituality side of things. How do I make that connection as a researcher? Because I want to look at documents and data, but with spirituality, it isn't about documents and data. So the one thing that's allowed me to kind of keep an open mind with that is speaking to people in the field that do come from a sort of more spiritual side of things with the phenomena. And even though, again, a lot of it's anecdotal, I will always keep an open mind. And, when we've got that kind of table in front of you with all the possibilities of what this phenomena represents, I will keep spirituality and all the kind of related stuff there, because you can't take it off until it's proven not to be kind of part of what it actually represents. And being able to have conversations on my show as well, when you talk about maybe religion and how it may be related to the phenomena, and all the things that may have been written about in the Bible that could be interpreted as phenomena or anomalous. Having conversations with such distinguished people such as Dr. Diana Pasulka allows me to kind of keep it all together to some degree, and just wait and let's see how people like her, a professor of religious studies who is continuously looking into the UFO subject, I'll follow her work and things like that. I won't just poo-poo it because, well, I'm not religious, so I'm just not even going to bother with it, which I know unfortunately does happen sometimes. So the spirituality side as a whole, I'll just continue having the conversation, I think, and being open-minded.
Well, and that almost circles it back to what we were talking about earlier with experiencers being somewhat kind of pushed to the side for now because everybody wants data. Well,
Yeah.
if you think about the 300 years ago when we didn't have cameras, we didn't have satellites, we didn't have, all we had was experimental anecdotal stories.
Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of the thoughts on spirituality come from, in my opinion, is those stories that people have been trying to pass through. As they saw a flaming wheel in the sky or something, and what was that?
Exactly. And that's the conversation I had with Diana. When you look at St. Francis of Assisi, this flaming wheel, like you say, and that's how it was written in the Bible and things. And then Diana puts it in such a beautiful way that makes you think, well, it could well be what we think is these days a UFO or UAP. And she's able to make that connection and draw that bridge. And that's what I've been taking on board and learning, or trying to learn more the last few years, is to be more open to these ideas where it links these very separate kind of areas of study, let's say. And the one thing I battle with as well is that people will say, well, UFO studies, when you look at it like that, will just become another religion. And and it's unfortunate that people think that way and that they try and pigeonhole some of us researchers like that. It doesn't really bother me that much, because I want to keep an open mind, because I can't say it is or it isn't. So why just completely ignore it through the fear of being ridiculed? I'm beyond that.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I'm kind of one of those people that it will almost create a new sense of spirituality or awareness, because I think that science and spirituality or religion meet at the top of the pyramid. Like, they're both coming at the same subject, but from different angles. And so there will be a moment where they do somewhat become one. I think I don't know if you've heard of Dan Winter, but he speaks a lot on the spirituality side with physics and math and trying to really put those things together. So he's kind of working on that already. What is your favorite UFO case?
Oh, that's a really good question. I get asked it a lot. I always give two answers to this question, and I'll be honest. The first one would be the Nimitz case, because we have the pilot data, these trained observers, we have them saying that these objects did what they did. They performed these extravagant maneuvers. And, then we learn that there's potentially actual sensor data to corroborate this as well. So yeah, that I can always talk about that case. I've been lucky enough to speak to people that were on the ships that day, and it's just one of those cases that I just love. The other case I really like is a lot more unknown, and it's a case over here in the UK, and we all know about Bentwaters and Woodbridge, the Rendlesham case in the 80s.
Yep.
But there was another case at Bentwaters back in, I think it was 1956, where pilots were taken off from the military base and they were encountering these objects that would appear in front of their plane and then whiz to the back, and it was caught on radar as well. And a colleague of mine actually interviewed some of these pilots about 20 years ago, so I have the audio files of the interviews, and they're very compelling to listen to. And so those kind of cases, from the 50s, where we have more data than just we know there was radar data, just things like that really stick out. I guess because I'm English, that an English case would also be one of my favorites as well. So
the Rendlesham Forest case is one of my favorites. Just, I mean, the guy comes down, he touches a craft, he gets a download, right? And then I think that same guy later on writes out a whole bunch of zeros and ones, binary code. It gets translated. That one I find very fascinating.
It's a difficult case for me because I have tried to look into it on multiple occasions over the years, and I've been lucky enough to interview one of the witnesses, John Burrows, who gives a slightly different story to Jim Penniston, who allegedly had the binary code download. And there seems to be slightly different versions of the story, and because of the amount of years that have gone by, the waters have got a little bit muddy. And then there's a place just down the road from that base called Orford Ness, where they were testing radar and laser before that, and Stanford Research Institute were a part of it. And it's just, there's so much there that we don't have data on still that might paint a better picture of the case were we to have that extra data. So for me, I just hit a brick wall on that case. I want it to be anomalous craft just landing, but it could be mind manipulation. It could be so many different things.
Well, I guess the reason I like it is because the binary code, when I think it was Linda Moulton Howe had someone, decipher it for, came up with coordinates, right, on the Earth. And those coordinates ended up relating to magnetic hotspots. And so that almost circles it back to what we were just originally talking about with the magnetic hotspots being somewhat of a portal to communicate with the ancestors. And so that one thing that I think that the binary code translated says, progress of humanity is at these coordinate systems. So that's why I find it just so fascinating. It seems to tie a lot of things together.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds great. But the one thing, and this is not me speaking, but the one thing that skeptics will say is that the story about the binary code didn't come out until 20 years later, I think around about 20 years later. And that they say that this was just added in to enhance the story, to make the individual putting back into the story, as it were. And I can kind of understand that point of view. I've listened to the witness as well, and I can see his point of view. And this is why I say that it's such a muddy case that you just don't know which way to look and what to believe.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see what else I have on my amazing list here. Have you heard of the Werner von Braun's deathbed not necessarily a deathbed confession, but how he says the last card the deep state's going to play is the fake UFO invasion?
I have heard that over the years many times, and it actually still comes up a lot for me personally. This thing about holograms and Project Bluebeam, I think they call it.
Yep,
And
yep.
I when I started Disclosure Team, I started it on Instagram. It's a very different kind of social media platform to Twitter. Twitter seems to be the more hardcore UFO followers. Instagram is people that might sort of dip in and out of it. And I think it draws in a lot more conspiracy theorists. And so I find that when I regularly post content, people will comment, "Oh, it's just Project Bluebeam. It's just the holograms that von Braun talked about." And, there's never been any evidence for it. That's my problem. I don't believe in this fake alien invasion hypothesis. I just don't. There's nothing that shows me that it points in that direction. I think even Dr. Greer has mentioned it a few times. And, like I said, I'm open to most ideas within this subject, but I just want a little bit of something that backs it up, some kind of testimony or something. I think it's too easy to just push it. It's okay. It's just Project Blue. It's just a hologram. It's just a fake invasion. Like, it's too easy to say that. I think
Well, there's evidence. I mean, and by evidence, I mean ancestor stories, right, from the last hundreds of years and whatnot. But I guess a modern person that has spoken about that is, have you heard of Rick Doty?
I've interviewed Rick and spoken to him privately. Yeah.
Right. So he speaks on how he used to help with, right? Didn't he help with fake? That's allegedly what he says.
Yes, absolutely. You know, Rick, he's a nice gentleman. I've met him in person a couple of times and had private conversations. He is very I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want to offend him. He's a nice guy, but
Yeah.
his job was to just sow seeds of disinformation throughout the UFO community for many years as part of his job. And so, I have to be honest and say I take a lot of what he says with a grain of salt, and unless it's corroborated with data again, I can't take it and push and roll with it, within my research or anything else. There have been times recently where things relating to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, where he worked in the 1980s, this has come up in my research, and so I've emailed him and asked questions, and then he sent me things back, and I'm just like, it doesn't fit with other things that I've found, and so very I'm very dubious about Rick, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it a challenging topic.
Yeah.
There's just so much out there. Um, is there anything you wanted to speak on, just in general?
I mean, nothing in particular, really. I mean, I think that one thing that I'm really impressed with at the moment is, there has been some good mainstream media coverage on this subject, especially in the US. The conversation's definitely being had across the nation where more members of the public are picking up on this, which I think will allow for more people to talk with friends and family and who are maybe curious and have seen something. I think that's a good thing. Also, I think academia seems to be getting on board with it a lot more. We've had people like Professor Avi Loeb and the Galileo Project, doing some great work and discussing UAP. And I'm lucky to be attending a conference this November in Paris, France, where it's a very science-based conference. It's at a place called the Sorbonne University, which is a very prestigious academic university, you kind of along the lines of your Harvards and things like that. And I'm looking forward to, I'm actually hosting the event, as in I'm emceeing it, so I'll be introducing a lot of the speakers such as Christopher Mellon, Avi Loeb, and Jacques Vallée, and then we're going to be having panel discussions which I'll be moderating. And I think these are the conversations I think that are going to really help the subject, and it's not like your everyday alien conference, let's say.
Yeah,
But even when I say alien conference, I attended a conference here in the UK last weekend, which was like that. And, I can honestly say that I didn't attend any one of the speakers that were there. I didn't watch any of their speeches, because the one thing I really am impressed by is the conversations had in private, networking and things like that. I met up with James Fox, who I've gotten to know quite well in the last few months, and I can tell you some of the work and conversations that we had that isn't yet public were mind-blowing. I'm sorry, I don't like to tease people, but
no,
so...
I understand. I totally imagine he did the report out. What country was it? Brazil or no?
Yeah,
It was.
he did
Okay.
that recent documentary on the Varginha case,
Yeah.
which is still ongoing. He's still working on that as well. But he's actually been working on a new documentary where he's been, right in the heart of Washington, D.C., interviewing a lot of people within the government, whistleblowers as well, whistleblowers that haven't come forward yet. So James is very confident that we'll be hearing more from that side of things as well. And I'd like to think there are exciting things happening in the background.
Oh yeah. What I think's exciting, I just wrote a little note while you were speaking about your Paris conference coming up. Jacques Vallée and Avi Loeb at the same table. Like
Well,
that.
unfortunately, Avi's joining virtually. Jacques going to be there in person with Christopher Mellon, but just those people having a conversation, whether it's virtually or not, but they are going to be within the same
Right.
panel conversation, and that's going to be incredible.
Oh,
I'm
I can
so honored to
imagine.
be a part of it.
Yeah, Jacques, for people that don't really know, he's more of like an interdimensional hypothesis kind of guy. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I think if you added up all of his theories over the years, I mean, and the books that he's written, I would highly recommend anybody go out there and read Passport to Magonia and then onto all of his other books. He's just he's a visionary in this subject.
And then Avi, almost on the other hand, is a very data-driven guy that we don't need new science because our science can already explain this. Meaning our understanding of physics can already explain it. Like is what he hopes.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah, he said, we don't need a lot of new physics and a lot of new science. We just need to work with what we've got, and we can get it right.
yeah. So that'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Well, I know we don't have too much more time left. Do you have any closing notes that you'd like to say, or?
I think the one thing I will say is to anybody, whether if they're new to the subject, don't be afraid to have the conversation. Don't be afraid to kind of jump in and look at all aspects of this subject, all aspects of the phenomena, the potentials and things like that. Find your people, find who you kind of vibe with and that, and don't be put off by negativity and naysayers. I just think that you can tread a fine line sometimes, and especially if you're on Twitter, I'm not afraid to sort of say that. I certainly have had pushback from people on social media and things like that. But I'm not a negative person. I take on board everything that people say, and I'm still on this journey of discovery myself, whether it about my thoughts and how I see the phenomena and everything that is associated with it. I just say to people, don't be afraid to have this conversation. I think it's important, and I think if we do find out, however far down the line, that this is real and that there is a non-human intelligence, then it's almost good to be prepared in some way.
Yeah, I think it's one of the greatest scientific discoveries that's yet to be solved. And so,
Absolutely.
in my opinion, every scientist and physicist and researcher should be looking into it. But it's not me to tell people what to look into. So
This is it. I think everyone just shouldn't be afraid, and because they will find their own place within the subject, what resonates with them. And it doesn't matter if other people have a difference of opinion, because the conversation can be had respectfully without being, on that kind of attacking end of things.
I think that's a great way to end this. Do you have places where people can find you, like your Twitter handle, YouTube handle?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to go would be Instagram, which is disclosure_team. And from there, I have like an all my links where they can then find me on every other platform, and every little bit of work or conference that I'm doing can be found there. So
perfect. And look out for season 3. It should be coming out pretty soon. So
yeah, 2024.
Phenomenology.
That's it, man. You got it.
I said it right. That's such a tongue twister. Well, thank you so much, Vinny, for being here. If you'd like to hang out for a minute after we end this, that'd be great. Thank you so much for joining today. I appreciate it.
Oh, Alexi, it's an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yes, sir. Thank you.